Hello, boys and girls. Mrs. B here. Since we've started on a new unit with nonfiction reading and research, I thought I would delve into a nonfiction book. We're going to use Causes of the Revolution by Jill Mulhall as our resource on how to read nonfiction. So what you first do is you notice all the usual things that we do when we start looking at a book. We notice the title, notice the pictures. You can flip to the back of the book and read the little summary here. It says Causes of the Revolution. When Great Britain taxed the colonists to raise money, the colonists became angry. Some taxes were repealed, but other taxes and new laws quickly took their place. Colonists boycotted and refused to purchase British goods. The leaders in Great Britain sent soldiers to keep the colonists in line. The colonists were soon inspired to fight for change. A pamphlet by Thomas Paine called Common Sense helped convince people that they were no longer British citizens, but Americans. The foundation had been laid for the American Revolution. So now, before we begin reading, we should also be thinking about what do we already know about the American Revolution? What has someone else taught us before? Or perhaps what else have we already read? It is important to think while you read, to get an idea of how the book is going to work, but also to think about the topic, what you may already know about it, what it connects to that you have already learned. So let's turn and look at this nonfiction book. I'll give you a little more. There we go. So the table of contents. Here we've got the topics and the corresponding pages in which those topics, or subtopics they're often called, can be found. So you see here it says the melting pot. What does that mean? We'll find out on pages 4 and 5. Melting pot. And then it not just gives you the regular writing, but you'll notice in nonfiction there are diagrams and captions. Here's one that has a map, little boxes, as we call them, of specific information to that particular page. So it's good to preview a book, to look what you already know. John Adams, have you heard of him before? Propaganda, I wonder what that word means. Notice there's also bold-faced words, more drawings. And at the back of the book, you can find the glossary. So the glossary here has bold-faced letters, words that are printed in boldface, and they give you like a mini dictionary specific to this book. So for instance, redcoat, it says a British soldier, so called because of his red uniform coat. So it's kind of like a nickname, okay? And over here we have the index. An index tells you where that word or phrase or topic can be found in the book. Some words or phrases have only one place, but others, like here, King George III, King of England, he's found on several pages. Same with the Boston Tea Party. So these numbers correspond to the many different pages that you will find information on that topic in the book. So let's begin reading. Causes of the Revolution. The long road to independence. The people who lived in America during colonial times grew angry about taxes and laws that they thought were unfair. They fought back in different ways. Some of them joined in protests. Others wrote powerful words. These leaders inspired the colonists to create their own country. The melting pot. More than 2 million people lived in the 13 British colonies in the mid-1700s. Some were born in the New World, which is what the North America continent was called, while others had crossed the dangerous ocean to make a new home. These colonists came from different countries. Many were from England. Some came from Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and Holland. Several of these countries had long-time problems with each other. They had even fought wars. But in the colonies, things were different. People worked hard to build homes and learned new skills. They did not have time to worry about things that had happened long ago. Now, boys and girls, I want to stop here because I want you to think. This is just a small look at colonial America, and it's the 13 British colonies. But they were not the only people living here. The Native Americans, whom at this time were called Indians, and you'll see that name in this book, were also living here. And some of them were pushed off their land. And some of them went to war with the new people settling this land. There were also people from Spain who came to the New World, as they called it. And they also wanted a new way of life for themselves and their families. So again, this is really important when we read nonfiction, that this does not necessarily give you all the information or all the viewpoints on a particular topic. It is important to read more than one source to get a full picture of what a particular time, place, event, or tragedy had for the facts. So here it shows you immigrants leaving Old England for America. Here it says a new kind of family. Some colonists married people who had come from other countries. Then they had children. For example, you might have a child who was half Scottish and half German. This helped bring the colonists together even more quickly. The people in America began to think that it did not matter where you came from. They lived in colonies that were ruled by Great Britain, so they proudly called themselves British citizens. This picture here tells you it was the battle during the French and Indian War in Pennsylvania. The colonists looked to Great Britain for help with many things. They followed England's laws and customs. They were loyal to Great Britain's king. They also enjoyed the protection of the British Army. Some people called England the mother country. They meant that England was like a parent. She loves you and helps you, but she also lets you know that she is the boss. In the 1750s, Great Britain went to war with France. The two countries wanted to see, once and for all, which country would control the New World. Again, I told you the New World is North America, or at least the eastern side of it. France had many Indians, otherwise known as Native Americans, fighting on its side. So the British colonists called the war the French and Indian War. Britain won the war, so it controlled all the land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and from Georgia to Maine. This made the New World safer for British settlers. The colonists began to think that they didn't need their mother around to protect them anymore. This little caption talks about moving west. Stamping out the Stamp Act. The French and Indian War was very expensive for Britain. The government decided it needed to raise some money. So Parliament passed a special tax just for the American colonists. It was called the Stamp Act. The act required people in America to buy a special stamp to put on all printed paper. This included things like newspapers, marriage license, and even decks of playing cards. This made the colonists very angry. We are citizens too, they thought. They did not want to pay a tax that the people in England did not have to pay. So the colonists did an unexpected thing. They refused to pay the tax. Many of them gathered in large mobs and scared off the men who were sent to sell the stamps. By the time the act was officially supposed to start, there was no one left to collect the money. Taxation without representation. You see how this is bolded in with green? That means it's an important topic or subtopic that you should take note of. So I'm going to read. It says the people in the colonies had no representatives in Parliament. This meant that they never got to vote on any of Britain's laws. They decided that they did not want to pay taxes unless they had a say. And that is called taxation without representation. A new way to fight back. The people in England were surprised at the colonists' reaction to the stamp. They could tell that the tax was not going to work, so Parliament repealed the act. Now remember, boys and girls, in the back there's a glossary, and it would tell you that repealed means to take back, so they're no longer going to make it be a law. Great Britain still needed money, so they passed a new set of taxes called the Townshend Acts. These laws tax glass, paint, paper, lead, and tea. And down below you can see that cartoon. It says the English cartoon showing a funeral for the Stamp Act. Made in the USA. And then here it talks about not accepting somebody because they were supporting the Townshend Act and the Stamp Act. All right. Now, Sons of Liberty. This is a special group we're going to read about. They met in secret. Once again, the people in America became angry. Nobody in England had to pay special taxes on these items. The colonists did not see why they should have to do so. Many people gave speeches and wrote articles. They convinced the colonists to try a new way to fight back. The colonists agreed to boycott British goods. This meant they would not buy anything made in Great Britain. The boycott worked. Soon the merchants in England grew angry at losing their business in the colonies. They made the government repeal the taxes. Things gone too far. The leaders in Great Britain were frustrated by the boycott. They decided to do something to quiet all this foolishness in America. So they sent 4,000 soldiers to Boston. That meant there was one redcoat, remember that meant a British Army soldier, for every 3 colonists in town. Do you think the people of Boston were happy about this? I don't think so. The colonists were mean to the soldiers. They called the soldiers names and threw things at them. On March 5th, 1770, a colonist got into a fight with a British guard. It started as a little thing, but then more and more people joined in the fight. The townspeople began pushing and shoving. They threw rocks and ice at the soldier. Soon, 8 more soldiers came to help him. The soldiers were scared by the noisy crowd. They got nervous. When somebody yelled fire, the soldiers shot into the crowd. 5 colonists were killed. The angry people called this the Boston Massacre. Okay, and that's where this propaganda word comes in. It says both sides were wrong on this sad day, but the colonists blamed the soldiers. People twisted the facts of what happened. Does that happen in our news today? I think it does. A printer named Paul Revere made a famous engraving. It shows the soldiers shooting for no reason. This image helped spread the wrong idea. But over here it talks about John Adams and how he said that the soldiers, just like any person, should have a fair trial. And he made sure they got it. Surprise party. Not the kind you're thinking. Remember how Parliament repealed the Townshend Acts? When they did that, they decided to keep the tax on tea. This was to show the colonists that Great Britain still had the power to tax its citizens. The colonists knew exactly what their leaders were up to, and they did not like it. Some colonists refused to buy British tea for more than 5 years. Then Parliament passed something called the Tea Act. This allowed only some shop owners to import and sell tea. The colonists did not want Britain to have so much control over their economy. Okay, here again, more information, bullets, drawings. A Boston man named Samuel Adams gave many speeches. He excited people and made them angry at Great Britain's leaders. He was a member of the Sons of Liberty. These men protested in the streets. One night in December 1773, some men dressed up as Indians and went aboard ships in Boston Harbor. They broke open 342 chests of tea and dumped it all into the harbor. The people cheered this Boston Tea Party. Of course, the colonists knew that they didn't really look like Native Americans, but their goal was certainly to make this as a big statement. Did it work? What do you think, boys and girls? The king's plan backfires. After the Boston Tea Party, King George III and his government decided to crack down on the colonies. They passed several harsh new laws that the colonists disliked. The colonists called these new laws the Intolerable Acts. That means they couldn't put up with them. One of these acts closed Boston Harbor. Now nobody could fish or use the ocean for trade. This put half the people in Boston out of work. And there you have a painting of King George III coming to the rescue. It says other colonists felt bad for the people of Boston. They sent them food and money. This was one of the first times the different colonies worked together. Another act forced colonists to allow British soldiers to move into their homes. That meant that the British soldiers could kick somebody out of their bedroom, out of their bed, and they got to stay there like a hotel, only they didn't pay for it. Other new laws cut back on the freedom that the colonists had to rule themselves. But the king had made a big mistake. A lot of people in America had stayed out of the troubles with Great Britain. They had never before seen a real reason to fight. These laws were so disliked that more and more people began to think about being free. Okay. Working together. Many people in the colonies had decided that things had to change, but they did not know what the next step should be. In 1774, the colonists decided to have a meeting. In the meeting, people from different colonies could talk about the problems with Great Britain. Well-known delegates from the colonies came to the First Continental Congress. So that's a very special meeting, boys and girls. And I want you to think about what they could possibly be talking about. They all had different ideas, but they listened to each other talk. Some of them even became close friends. I know, boys and girls, there were no cars or trains or buses. They all had to come either by foot or by horse, or maybe even some of them might have had some sort of cart. All right. Together they wrote a message to King George. They called it the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. It politely explained all the colonists' complaints. The king refused to even read it. The delegates knew a fight was coming. They told the leaders of the colonies to start forming militias. What do you think a militia is, boys and girls? Can you imagine? What should we do now? The colonists organized many small armies. Now do you know what a militia is? This angered the British soldiers. On April 19th, 1775, redcoats marched into Lexington, Massachusetts. They planned to confiscate or take weapons hidden there. A colonial militia group waited for the British. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, but soon the two sides clashed. Many other battles followed. The colonists wondered, what should we do now? It was one thing to talk about breaking away from England. It was another to actually fight to form a new country. They called another meeting, the Second Continental Congress. First, the delegates worried about being ready to fight. They organized the small armies into one large continental army. Then they spent a long time arguing about what the colonies should do next. I want to point out to you here, boys and girls, outnumbered. Not everyone in the colonies wanted to fight. Thousands of people were loyal to the British government. After all, they considered themselves British citizens. These loyalists had a hard time during the war. Many of them lost all their property. The power of words. The colonists were considering doing something that had never been done before, but they had many concerns. How could a few scattered colonies defeat powerful Great Britain? If they did win, what would they do without a king to tell them how to live? Could they really choose their own leaders? A man named Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense. He explained things in simple terms. He pointed out that governments led by kings do not work very well. Paine also argued that it was silly for a tiny island 3,000 miles away to be in charge of America. Common Sense sold many copies in a short time. It helped convince the colonists that the best thing to do was to break their bonds with England. In July 1776, the Continental Congress sent the Declaration of Independence to King George. They were no longer British citizens. They were no longer colonists. They were Americans. And there we are. The thing about a nonfiction book, boys and girls, is that it's easy to go to one section or another, to go back and look for things maybe you missed, you didn't get a chance to read, or when you're comparing it to another text, to go back just to that section that the two different texts have in common. Remember to think while you read, take small notes, compare and contrast, but think also about how one set of information adds to other information you already had. And let's enjoy this reading unit.